It's podcast day. It's podcast day. Hello. Welcome to the heyBrownBerry Knitting Podcast. I'm Mars. Thanks for being here. If it's your first time, this is a podcast about making and my journey through making. And if you're a return viewer, I'm so glad you came back. Today we're going to be recording, surprisingly not from the interior of my car, but instead from a beautiful nature preserve near my house. I can't wait to show you all the lovely greenery here. And I've got lots to share with you. Let's take a look around. The Grassy Waters Preserve where I am is a remnant wetland of the historic Loxahatchee Slough. Loxahatchee is the name of the town I live in. And here at the preserve, we're at the headwaters of the Loxahatchee River, and you're looking at just a map of the trail system here. There's a 23.5 square mile watershed, which actually supplies fresh drinking water for the city of West Palm Beach, which is the nearest major city to me. And it supplies that fresh drinking water to West Palm Beach and the surrounding communities. So we're about to take a walk on one of these trails. Most of the trail system has this really nice, well-maintained wooden walkway, which allows you to be among the trees. There's often some really good wildlife spotting, and all along the way there are these little informational postings that tell you about some of the history of the area and some of the species that you might see. This is one of the natural wetland areas that my family and I love to come to. It's just an easy walk. There's lots of different places you can go on the trail, and we've seen some really cool stuff here. As some of you might know, Florida has quite a rich history, and there's a lot of native people that were based here many centuries ago. So I love learning about some of these tribes. Here's some information about some of the tribes that were started in our area. So in case you can't read it, this sign says, when the Spanish first arrived in Florida in 1513, they found thriving populations of native people broken into various tribes by region. By the mid-1700s, most members of Florida's original tribes had been killed in warfare, were enslaved, or died from European diseases. The few that remained most likely integrated into other groups of Native Americans fleeing south from Georgia and Alabama. These groups of refugee Native people would eventually become the Seminole tribe. And of course, the Seminole tribe is one that is well known for the state of Florida. So a little bit of information about the area where we are. I'm going to find a nice place to sit down and we're going to talk some knitting. Hopefully this nice quiet green background will be good for us to have a little chat. So if you're not familiar with wetlands and really the purpose that they serve, wetlands have a variety of ways in which they sort of perform a service for us humans. They help to moderate the climate by reducing the temperature extremes. They store heat in the summer and release that heat in the winter, which for us Floridians is something we definitely need. They store carbon. Dead plants that form the wetland muck, they store carbon instead of releasing it to the atmosphere as harmful carbon dioxide. Wetlands are also a wildlife habitat. They provide food, water, and shelter for many animals. So over 50% of the threatened or endangered species in America actually rely on wetlands. And there's a filtration process that happens by the plants. They intercept runoff, they store and transform pollutants and excess nutrients, and they improve our overall water quality. I think I found the spot where we can do today's recording. A nice view for us, some good light, and some really soothing sounds of the critters in the bush. Good place to sit if I can set up, I think. And some shade, which is always important. Testing angles and sound for the podcast to make sure you guys can hear me. Thank you so much for being here. What a setting for recording a podcast, right? I'm going to take off my sunglasses now that I have a little bit of shade, and let's get into some knitting. Final test. I want to make sure that I don't waste a lot of time recording things I can't use, of course. A deer just came galloping along in the water nearby me. I hope you were able to see it. He's hanging out among the trees right now. May not be able to see him, but wow, that was amazing. I didn't expect that. Well, that was a bit of excitement with a deer running by. Whew. I'm pretty accustomed to coming to natural areas and catching glimpses of things that surprise me and delight me, if I'm being honest. That's part of why I like being outside. I love being outside. I'm very fortunate that where I live, I can be outside most of the year. I know that some of you who are watching live in places that have more distinct seasons. I think there is great value in that too, watching the seasons change. Here we have different degrees of hot and hotter for most of the year. It's getting warm right now. It's not that late in the morning and it's pretty warm, but comfortable enough that I can share some knitting with you. So yes, I am a Jamaican Floridian who knits with wool and sometimes has to work with that wool in warm and humid temperatures. I'm okay with that. I want to share with you some of the things that I have finished and that I've been working on. If you watched a couple of my previous episodes, you know that I took on a project as a way to remember my experience at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival. So I'm going to start with that project. I finished it. It's my fleece flight wrap, and I'll insert here a video of my fleece flight wrap with my Edinburgh Yarn Festival 2018 yarn stash. So as you can see, it's quite large and I love it. I actually finished that project right before traveling to the Northeast US, and I didn't even block it. I was so excited to have it done at a time when I was going to somewhere cold enough to wear it that I didn't worry about blocking it. I wore it almost for 2.5 days straight. I had the chance while I was in the Northeast to see Jess of Ravelry. I call her Jess of Ravelry, but she is a friend. She was kind enough to meet me, and I was able to wear my fleece flight out to dinner with her. Hi Jess, if you're watching. I love the fact that when I travel for work, I can meet up with other makers. And Jess will tell you that I didn't take this wrap off for most of dinner. I absolutely adore it. There's so much to this. I'm afraid that I'll go on and on about it, but I will try to keep it short. Now that you've seen it, I'll explain a little bit about how the project began. So this is the Fleece Flight Wrap by Maria of Ninja Chickens. This is a pattern that you can find on Ravelry, and it is just a genius but simple outer wrap, and I've had this pattern for a while. Maria gifted it to me, and I had it in my stash with the intent to use a set of yarns that I had purchased on a trip. But while we were in Edinburgh, Maria was wearing hers, and she actually let me borrow it one night, and I think that's what sealed it for me. I decided I had to have one. And while I was there at the Yarn Festival, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to make this wrap, which is 6 panels, 6 different panels of wool, or 6 different panels of any yarn, really. Wouldn't it be cool to make it out of yarns that I purchased at the festival that were new to me? So I call it my wool study. I was able to find yarns from different shepherds and shepherdesses that I had not tried before. And because this construction of the wrap allows you to do this very simple color blocking, but in a really beautiful way. I was able to use 6 brand new to me yarns to create it. And then it became a way to get to know those yarns, to see what they were like to knit with, to see how the hand squish grab factors came out for each. That's a phrase I'm borrowing from Louise of the Knit British podcast. And to really decide whether or not I would want to use these yarns more in the future, and what types of projects I might want to use them for, whether it be socks or sweaters or other accessories. And it worked beautifully as a wool study. I went to the website for each of the producers to find out more about the yarns. I've written notes on my Ravelry project page. I am heyBrownBerry on Ravelry as well. So if you want to know my real-time, in-the-moment thoughts about each one, please go to the Ravelry link in the description of this video. But it was a great way to explore these wools, and it's a perfect souvenir from the festival. Believe it or not, there are places I travel to that still have very cold weather now. So I know that even though it's April, I'm still going to get use out of it, and I'm really happy about that. It's not so great for Florida tropical wetlands, but it's perfect for airplanes and conference rooms. And we're planning a camping trip in a couple of months. In June, we're planning to go camping, and I know from experience, having been at this campsite, that at night it gets very cold. We like to camp by a creek in North Carolina, and the temperatures there at night are completely suited to something warm and squishy like this. So thank you to all of the wool producers who made this possible. And I highly recommend this pattern. It's all garter stitch with some short row shaping that gives you the triangular pieces that connect to each other. So there's not too much thinking involved. I was able to get into a rhythm with it. And if you want to sample some yarns or use up some stash, I recommend Fleece Flight. Now let's talk about a work in progress. I have been working on my crochet granny stripe blanket for some time. I've shown it a couple of times before, here and on Instagram. It's building slowly. And I brought it with me because this will also go camping with us, and I'll use it sitting by the campfire. So I only have a couple months to finish it up, but this is the crochet granny stripe blanket. It's a free pattern by Lucy of Attic 24. You can find it on Ravelry. Here's my progress so far. I think I need an assistant for holding up all these big woolly projects. I'm loving it. Again, it's another way to experience a lot of different yarns, and I'm purposely striping in any kind of worsted, between DK to worsted, and even a couple of bulky yarns. So there's some different thicknesses in there. The crochet stitching itself is very simple, and that's good. That's what I look to some of my projects for, is just a relaxed, kind of easy, repeatable situation where I don't have to think too hard. And this is some shell stitches created with double crochet. I did have a little leftover yarn from a couple of the Fleece Flight yarns that I used, so it's caught under my chair here. It's a very professional show here, folks. So, for example, this is Daughter of a Shepherd, and I'm using up the remainder of this in this blanket as one of the stripes. And I'll just go probably a couple of stripes of this, and then throughout the blanket I'll sprinkle it in again. But this is a great way to use up yarns that way. And I don't only use scraps for it now. I did another blanket like this in fingering weight that was primarily scraps and minis and other little bits that were gifted to me. But this one, I am even pulling from my stash and just using a few grams of yarns that I want to have in the blanket instead of only reserving scraps for it. So I'm really enjoying this one. It's the Crochet Granny Stripe blanket, and I think I'll be able to finish it in time if I just focus on it and work on it some more. By this point, you can see that I clearly don't care much about the outside temperature as a way to decide on projects. All wool, all the time. So are any of you knitting sweaters out there still? It's mid-April, and it's funny that we don't think about sweater knitting as much when the temperatures start to warm up in the Northern Hemisphere. I know that our friends in Australia are probably getting some sweater knitting going, but I think a little differently. I think when we can, we should work on our cold weather clothing so that it's ready for autumn and winter and those colder temperatures. I'm knitting a second Georgetown. I previously made a version of Hannah Fettig's Georgetown cardigan in Cascade Lana d'Oro merino alpaca yarn in a beautiful light gray. This is one of my favorite garment knits to date. I love the fit, I love the feel of the yarn, and I'm very impressed with the way the pattern was written. I love that sweater so much that when it was done, I wore it quite a bit. And I wore it one morning out to breakfast with a friend of mine, a very good friend, and she loved it. She often travels to the Pacific Northwest and to colder places as part of her work. And she said, I would love a sweater like that if you'd make it for me. And she actually sourced the yarn. This is Cascade Lana d'Oro in a beautiful cream color. And I agreed to make it for her. She's completely knit-worthy. So I'm making a second Georgetown. This pattern is by Hannah Fettig, and it's really well written. My first version of it was done in pieces and seamed, but this second version, I'm knitting almost seamless. Both versions are available in a single pattern, and I just wanted to see what the experience would be like to knit the other version. So I've made some progress on the back and up to the arms. It's kind of hard to see now. So here is one armhole and the back body, and here's the other. Those of you who knit sweaters may be able to kind of visualize what this will look like, but if you don't, it probably just looks like a big panel of knitting. Loving this yarn, loving this process. It's really interesting to knit the same sweater again, but with a different construction, because it has me paying really close attention to the pieces and parts of the sweater. And because my friend is a different size than I am getting the opportunity to do math. Let's be honest, you can't escape the math in knitting, and make sure that the size is right for her. We went to breakfast again recently, and she was kind enough to let me measure her in public in a restaurant so that I could make sure the measurements for her sweater would be just right. I really enjoy working on this because it's primarily some stockinette, back and forth, knit flat, and this is the same yarn I used for my original, and I really enjoy it. It's a 50-50 merino wool and alpaca mix. It is a nice dense fabric, but still a bit of drape comes from that alpaca. So I look forward to gifting this to her when it's done. I work on it every now and then. I'm working on pieces of it, and because the pattern is familiar to me, I just find it enjoyable. You can find this pattern by Hannah Fettig on Ravelry and many other sweater patterns of hers, which I am so tempted to knit. One last thing I want to show you that is not a work in progress yet, but I call it needle adjacent. That's a term I borrow from Chanel. Hi, Chanel. Needle adjacent means I haven't cast it on yet, but I'm itching to. This project is driven by a couple of things. While I was at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival, I purchased my first Blacker yarn. Some of you in the community have heard about Blacker yarn and know their story. You may want to go to the Knit British podcast and listen to some back episodes where she talked with the folks about Blacker just as they were getting their brand started. I was able to grab and squish some of their yarn at the festival, and I decided that I wanted to try a natural nylon-free sock yarn. And so I picked up the Blacker Mohair blend, which is a 4-ply, in this beautiful color. I hope that I'm doing this in a way that you can see it well. So this mohair blend is going to be a pair of socks for my youngest daughter. This is a color she loves, and I've been excited to try a mohair blend yarn. I have not used a mohair blend before for any project, and I've heard good things about its strength for socks especially. I've also heard really great things about Blacker yarns in general from my friends who knit socks and sweaters and other things. So having this as a souvenir for the festival, knowing that I'm making something for a very knit-worthy person was already good motivation. But then I got some happy mail. This is a DPN case by Lee of the Louleigh podcast, who I met in person as well over in Scotland. I have been an admirer of Lee's sewing skills and knitting skills for quite some time. I'm a fan of her podcast. Hi, Lee, if you're watching. And she sent me, well, I ordered this DPN case the other day when she had updated her Etsy shop. Look. The fabric is gorgeous. It is sturdy. The whole thing is really well made, and I've recently gone back to using DPNs in my knitting, so this was a great excuse to cast on a new yarn, to use this beautiful DPN case, and then as a bonus, Lee she gifted me a set of Knit Pro Zing double-pointed needles. I've never used this particular brand of double points before, but I've wanted to for a long time. I love when things work out in a coincidental way like that. I put in my other DPNs to the case right away because I was so excited to receive it, and I'm really looking forward to casting on some socks. I think I may do some sort of simple texture with the yarn just because I love to see this tonal yarn in a textured pattern. Nothing too complicated though, since I'm working with DPNs after not having done so for a long time. I want to give myself a chance to do it well. How about you? Have you tried any new yarns lately that you're excited about? I do a lot of things on recommendation, so if you have a yarn out there that you think I should know about, let me know. I'd just love to connect with you in that way and go on a new knitting journey for you and for me. Thank you again, Lee. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to share with you something that has happened recently that I'm so proud of, and I've been keeping it as a secret for a little while just to get everything ready. I'm talking about the launch of a joint venture with my friend Kelly of the CelticCastOn podcast. Hi, Kelly. She and I have started a business together called Makers Merch, as in Makers Merchandise. This is a business we created, and our mantra is, this brand is by makers for makers. If you're watching this podcast, that includes you. We really enjoy the connection that comes from being part of this maker community. This podcast, as I've said in the past, is really about connections. My knitting and crochet projects are about connections with you, with my friends in real life, and even sometimes a connection with myself. Often when I sit down to create, it's a time to give myself space to connect back to things that I love and to connect to a sense of calm, which I need. So Kelly and I thought we enjoy this so much that that sense of community should be shared. So we started Makers Merch. You can find us now on Etsy as Makers Merch and on Instagram as Makers Merch. And if you follow either of us on Instagram, you will have seen our recent launch of our first 2 collectible products. Here's a short video of our first 2 products that we're offering to all of you. I can't tell you the joy we have been given in releasing these first 2 enamel pins. You like them. You really like them. The response has been amazing. And I think it's because we've taken time to explain why we decided to release these 2 pins in particular to start. Our Knitrovert pin seems to have connected with a lot of you. Knitrovert is a combination of the words knitting and introvert, and many of us who knit and craft are introverted in some way, if not slightly, to some degree. We like our alone time, or we can also be very active and energetic in a social situation, but then we need our time to refuel and reconnect and re-energize. And so the Knitrovert pin and the Maker Community pin seem to really connect with many of you. There are still a few left in our Etsy shop, and we are restocking very soon. If you like what you see, please feel free to go over there. You can read our story and our mission on Etsy and on Instagram. And if it connects with you, feel free to get one for yourself or a friend. I am very excited to be doing this with someone that I've become close to through making. And I hope that it's something we can all enjoy together. Well, friends, though I brought with me what felt like a huge bag of things, I think I'm going to wrap up there today with what I shared. I'm so happy for the moments that I get to spend talking to this little camera, but feeling like I'm talking to you. I hope that you've really enjoyed today's setting. I will very likely come back here and find another spot where we can sit and make together. Until then, if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to know when my next episode comes out, feel free to subscribe. Thank you to all of you who've already done that. I'm wishing you a very good week. I'm going to go check out what's making that noise in the water over there. All right, see you again soon. Bye. All done. I'm just gonna do a headstand. You guys don't mind me, but
I'm just gonna not even pay attention.
Camera's right there. Feel free to do a cameo.
we're gonna stay out of it.